There has been something of a sea change in American society over the past 18 months. Most of it could be pinned down to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, but other issues were bubbling just under the surface. Questions about racial equity and marijuana prohibition have altered the way we think about policing in the 21st century. Joining Municipal Voice today is Danbury Police Chief Patrick Ridenhour to talk about how municipal police force adapts to our new normal. We'd like to thank our premier sponsor, Digital Back Office Palo Alto Networks. Check them out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. Chief, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning still. Yeah,
Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, congratulations on becoming the president of the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association.
Thank you.
Previously served as vice president of the association, and you've been the chief for Danbury since 2016.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to the profession of policing and how kind of your career path led you to be, the top slot in Danbury?
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Waterbury. My father was a police officer in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. So I don't have much of a memory of him as a police officer because I was very little when he was injured and retired. And my mother was a school teacher, so I think public service has just always been in our blood, in our background. So I was born and raised there, and I joined the Waterbury Police Department in 33 years ago now. Wow. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. It was great to serve in the community where I grew up for 20 years. I went up through the ranks there. I left there as the assistant deputy chief, where I was the chief of the entire uniform division for the department. Then I went to Stratford. I was the deputy chief for a year and a half and the chief for 5.5 years there. And then now former Mayor Boughton gave me this tremendous opportunity to come to the city of Danbury, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah, Mayor Boughton took off for the state capitol there to work in the administration.
Yes,
so
he
you
did.
have a new boss this year. That's another thing that's changed recently.
Yes.
And
Mayor Cavo has been great supporter of public safety in general, but the police department. He has served on the city council as president for over a decade. So, he was able to hit the ground running, and things are going well here.
So far, so good with the new administration. Yes. That's always good to hear. From an outsider's position, at least, it seems like a lot has changed in policing in the last few years. We've got a pandemic, we've got some equity issues going on, we've got legal marijuana, like all sorts of things. What changes have you seen in your 33-year career?
Well, that's just it. I think a lot of times people, that are new to this see this as a huge change in the way that we do things. But if you've been around for as long as I have, things change, every relatively frequently. New laws come out, new societal norms come out, and we have to adjust accordingly in this profession. So, I don't see the changes that have come as catastrophic. It's the people through their elected officials who decide what our jobs are, and so we just respond accordingly, and hopefully can still give our communities the best professional and service at all times.
So some of the ones that make for good headlines have changed a little bit recently, but for you guys, change is kind of the constant, not the exception.
I believe so. I believe so, and I think anybody who has been around for a while knows that this isn't the first time that we've seen significant changes in what is expected of us.
Always there to adapt. So, as I mentioned, one of the big ones this year, a big policy change really, was Senate Bill number 1201, an act concerning the responsible and equitable regulation and adult use of cannabis, which legalized marijuana, though it is still federally prohibited. The implications of this bill are far-reaching, but to start, how does this change policing?
Well, I mean, from the enforcement standpoint, it certainly changes it. That it's not something that we're going to be able to enforce, whether it's through a summons or through a custodial arrest. So that's
Mhm.
that's the first thing that that changes for us. Certainly the rules have now changed. If we smell marijuana in a car on a motor vehicle stop, and the rules change clearly if someone is in possession of less than the required amount of marijuana. So, those are the things. Those are the immediate changes.
Mhm.
How it impacts everything that we do in terms of motor vehicle stops, in terms of whether or not someone's impaired or our
Mhm.
accident rates. That all remains to be seen.
Yeah.
So it's too early to tell for us as to whether or not it's going to have a major change in the way that we're used to doing things.
Yeah. I know, did you feel like you were given enough time at the police force for training to handle such a change where it was legalized less than 2 weeks after it was signed into law? So, how are your officers on the ground and the community handling the kind of quick change?
Sure. If there's one criticism of the bill, it is the speed with which it came out. I do not think that we've been given enough time to train, enough guidance that has come out for our people to know exactly what it is that they can and cannot do.
Hmm.
And I think probably the same is can be said for people within the communities. Like,
Hmm.
what does this mean? Which is why you see a lot of municipalities putting a moratorium on dispensaries and things of that nature until they can put committees together to
Hmm.
really study this issue and figure out what is the best way to move forward. So, again, I think it's a work in progress. I
Yeah.
wish that maybe if it had been passed, that it had been delayed for at least 6 months, just so everyone can get their arms around it. But
Hmm.
like anything else, we'll just have to adapt as we go along. The Post Council has given us some guidance, and I know we get some from our state's attorneys as well. And we'll manage the best that we can.
Yeah. I think one of the questions that a lot of people have around this change in policy, it's not just, what you do if you smell it, but, if an officer suspects that they are driving under the influence, without the ability to have a breathalyzer as you would with alcohol, how do you answer that question as to how officers are supposed to deal with something like that?
Right. I mean, recognition experts are few and far between right now. I mean, there's going to
Hmm.
be certainly more training and how we can recognize certain signs, and
Hmm.
and certainly if there's an accident where someone is injured, we can do search warrants for their blood. So
Hmm.
again, it's just one of those that we're just going to have to wait and see. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate that has to be the answer to most of the questions, but
Mm.
with regard to this
It's early,
legislation,
yeah. Yeah.
it's so early. It's so early in the game, and we have the same concerns that people in the communities have. And
Hmm.
but we'll, like I said, we'll just. I think there's just going to be a lot of test cases probably over the next several months to a year, and then
Hmm.
that way we'll figure out the best way that we can move forward with this.
Yeah. I think you mentioned drug recognition experts, and that's
Mhm.
actually like an accreditation that officers can go and learn the physical, I guess, signs and
Yes.
that
Yes.
sort of stuff
Yeah.
to really know what it looks like if someone is under the influence of something.
Mhm.
Do you have any certified drug recognition experts yet, or do you have plans to get that sort of training for some of your officers?
I mean, we have plans for training for our officers,
Hmm.
as I know many departments do.
Hmm.
But I know that there's just really not a lot currently certified in the state of Connecticut.
I know, as you said, it's early, it's hard to tell yet, but anecdotally, do you think there's been more accidents? Have you been hearing that around, or?
Have not heard that yet. I think every community gets their fair share of accidents.
Mhm.
But I haven't heard of anything yet as it relates to marijuana use.
Specifically, and specifically being legal now, yeah, because there was
Right.
accidents before, accidents after.
Right.
Um, One key of factor of the bill is the equity kind of implements to erase prior convictions that occurred from January 1st, 2000 to October 1st, 2015, marijuana related convictions.
Mhm.
What is the police perspective on this policy? pro-marijuana groups, some legislators say that many of these convictions are low-level, single-time offenders, and that they're not something we should be worried about. Do you see that as true in general?
I think if that's the intent, I don't think you're going to find much argument from from people who serve as law enforcement officers that I don't think any small time offense should ruin someone's ability to get decent housing or decent employment. Certainly if there's other factors where there's sales of marijuana and other things that those would have to be taken into consideration. But I think just a simple possession offense shouldn't ruin someone for the rest of their life.
Yeah, which is obviously the goal of some of those provisions in the law. Do you think, dealing with that kind of change in 2 weeks, but do you think that the fact that Connecticut had largely decriminalized small possession before that kind of made the transition a little easier, that it was already not something that you're necessarily slapping the cuffs right on and hauling them off for?
Sure, I think somewhat. I think we saw it coming. To a certain extent, but the fact that it was already decriminalized certainly made us question as to why the rush to fully legalize it when probably over the last several years you haven't really seen anyone getting significantly jammed up for simple possession.
Yeah, but some of those older convictions, I'm sure, were quite happy that provision was in there to help them out.
Right. But I think you could have done one without the other.
That's true.
You could have said, okay, immediately, let's erase the records, of people who've been convicted for minor possession. But in terms of the full legalization, let's wait 5 or 6 months so that we can ensure that proper training and education.
Figure out all the details first, rather than make it up as we go. But you did mention that in one regard, Danbury is giving yourself a little bit of time by putting in a moratorium on retail sales, at least. So there is a retail moratorium, year-long one in Danbury on legalization. Do you think that eventually retail sales will come to Danbury after the dust kind of settles in other areas?
I mean, I think that remains to be seen. The city's put together an ad hoc committee to study the issue, and so I think our first meeting is later this week, and so I really couldn't comment on how we ultimately are going to move forward on that.
So many questions still up in the air.
Yeah. On this topic, yes, there's so many.
And there's little things all over the place that we don't necessarily think about before we legalize things, but then we afterwards have to deal with. For instance, are you going to be regulating the public use of cannabis? And if so, I know there's a population threshold for towns, and Danbury hits that population threshold, where you're supposed to designate a location where public consumption is allowed. Do you have any idea where that might be and why that location would be chosen or anything?
No, not at this time. That's that again. I think it's going to be something that's going to be referred to our committee that has several different departments within the city represented, and I think a few members of the city council. And I think that's all going to be part of our charge to determine the best way to handle this new legislation so that it doesn't interfere with the quality of life for people who aren't interested in using marijuana.
Yeah. I suppose
that's the balance that we have to find right now is what is going to work in the best interest of everyone. Because I mean, I know that take the uniform off and just being a private citizen. I know I don't want to be in an environment with my family and someone is 2 feet away from me or even 10 feet away from me smoking marijuana. It's just
but
it's not the right thing to do.
Find the ways to do it like we largely have with cigarette smoke. If you're sitting under the awning at the restaurant out front, you can't be that sort of thing. Considering that it has kind of been being legalized state by state, do you think that eventually the federal government is probably going to follow suit? And if so, do you think there's something from what we've done so far that should be included or not included in that federal law, to improve upon what's been going on so far?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, the federal government really takes a serious look at it, and perhaps there may be some legalization of it at the federal level, which certainly opens up the banks and to ensure the money that's being made off of these sales.
Mm.
My concern is really more on the employment side. There are certain jobs where such as this one, where it's just not in anyone's best interest for us to be under the influence of any sort of drug like marijuana. And so where do we get the next generation of police officers or other jobs, firefighters or other jobs that really require you to be clean, and how do we look at that in terms of when we do background checks of someone and they say, well, it was legal, I'm doing, I was doing it. How do we sort all of that out? So that's a big concern that we have, going forward as we do recruitment. It is still banned regardless of what happens at the state or federal level. It is banned by our policy, and I know that it's banned by many other police departments' policies, and I'm sure fire departments as well. But as society's norms change, it's another challenge that we may face in terms of getting qualified people to take these jobs.
One thing I heard in that last part, you were talking about equity, and I know that your department has had a push recently for more equitable hiring practices. Can you talk about that effort a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think the difficulty we always have is getting applicants. And I mean, it's not a challenge just faced here in Danbury. It's a challenge faced by many police departments throughout the state, and to increase their diversity. I mean, I don't think that there's any department in the state that does not want to have police officers that reflect the community that we serve. But if people don't apply, it makes it that much more difficult for us to hire them. And so we here, we're not in an official recruitment period right now, but we've had some success with our last recruitment period by going to certain events like sponsored by our NAACP and our local block parties in some of our communities, and just really talking to people and talking through our Explorer program, which now we call them cadets, but they're which is very diverse as well. And I would love to see in the future some way of being able to use them as a pipeline into our organization. So we've made some gains over the last year and a half, but certainly I would like to see ultimately our department, as well as many departments throughout the state, to be a little bit more diverse and reflective of those communities, because it does go a long way. I know I found it to be very helpful during my time in Waterbury, and to be able to not only serve there but to grow up there, and for people to know who I was and to be able to respond accordingly, and for me to be able to respond accordingly to them because of my knowledge of the community and just the symbol that I was, and the example that you try to set for the next generation.
I know this is one that comes up sometimes when we talk about, having trouble finding recruits and stuff like that. Have you had issues in the past, and do you see work on the future with quote unquote poaching between departments, where one department will train up an officer? It could be sometimes like Danbury or New Haven, a larger town, and then after they're trained at some point, they go off and take the higher paying job in the suburb or something. And the complaint being from the larger town that they paid for that training sort of thing. So where do you see that issue?
Right. I think it's, I think it's, it has happened to some degree. I mean, certain departments, salaries and benefits, and mainly retirement are less appealing than other places. I mean, over the last few years, there are some departments that have gone to 401ks instead of pensions, and so people that are in those departments do look to leave after they serve a certain amount of time, get their certifications, and do look to leave for something that's a little bit more stable. So it's happened. We have hired laterals before too. Over the last few years, we have solicited for laterals. Some people, but there's others that just need a change of scenery, and so we don't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of us can see where as the individual person who wants the shit, like, yeah, I would want to change that job for higher pay and whatever too. But
Right.
for the police departments, it does pose problems, certainly.
Right. So that's it's a fine balancing act sometimes when we're trying to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some success with the laterals that we've hired,
Mm-hmm.
and and sometimes you feel like if they don't come here, if we don't do it, they're going to go somewhere else. If someone's really not happy with where they are and they're looking to leave, they're going to find a home somewhere.
Yeah,
And,
you're not chasing after them. People are looking
right,
for those jobs. Yeah.
right.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM.
We talked about kind of the marijuana legalization, which was a big one in 2021. But in 2020, the Police Accountability Bill was signed into law.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, it was referred to as a work in progress. How is Danbury adapting a year later?
So far, we've adapted pretty well. I know as of July 1st, the so-called qualified immunity was changed, but it hasn't had any impact on our personnel at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's still a responsibility for the municipality to cover officers who are acting appropriately,
Mm-hmm.
even if there are lawsuits are filed against them. And the
Mm-hmm.
only way that they're not covered is when their actions are proving to be willful and unlawful. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's still protections that are there.
Mm-hmm.
We got ahead of it with our body cameras. We had already been looking at
Mm-hmm.
body cameras prior to the implementation of the accountability bill. We had been
Mm-hmm.
testing them. We had hoped to have them in place even before the bill was passed, but
Mm-hmm.
we had some snafus with the vendors, so we kind of had to start the project all over again. But we did start deploying our body cameras
Mm-hmm.
back in March of this year, and I know the implementation date is July 1 of 2022. So
Mm-hmm.
we're ahead of schedule on that.
Yeah.
And I know that there's, speaking of, wearing my other hat as the, Connecticut Police Chief's president, I know
Mm-hmm.
that there are many other departments that are on schedule to implement body cameras in their departments as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's another thing that we have worked on. The mental health assessments for
Mm-hmm.
our officers, that's something that we should be beginning probably next month. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that there are several other departments, because their employee assistance programs already offered that,
Mm-hmm.
that they've started already. So those are things that are going forward with the accountability bill.
Mm-hmm.
So
it sounds like you and some other towns were already kind of making a lot of those changes before the bill went into effect.
Right. Here our employee assistance program didn't offer that feature for mandatory wellness checks. They prefer, to do the, for people to come to them voluntarily.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to reach out to some other qualified doctors to be able to do the mandatory assessment. So that's why we're a little behind schedule from where we want it to be, but we're not behind in terms of what was been required by the legislation. So
yeah. So your own personal goals, you're trying to
right.
The legal ones, you're A-okay on.
Right. So the minority recruitment, we have to submit a report every year as to what we've done. If clearly, if we are in an official recruitment period, what we've done to try to increase diversity within our departments. And the state has set up a portal for that, so I know the departments are complying with that. And we did a preliminary study on the use of more social workers. Clearly, that's an expense that's involved with that. But we are still looking at it, and we're trying to free up some funding to maybe increase what we're doing already. We do have a part-time clinician that goes on ride-alongs with our officers and is a resource for us in doing follow-up for people who are in crisis or those types of calls. That's been provided by the state. We had lost our clinician for a while, but we did get one back recently, and he's working out very, very well with our personnel.
Yeah.
Military surplus. we had to start a new reporting requirement
Mm-hmm.
for military surplus equipment. Our department never had anything, significant other than rifles that we would be able to get.
No tanks or anything.
No tanks, nothing, no grenade launchers or anything
That's
like that.
probably good.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I don't know of any department that had those types of things. So, but if it's a concern for the people, then it's a concern for us. And so, to tighten it up a little bit and make sure that everyone knows what we have and what we don't have, that's fine. But we never had anything of significance. Anything that we had through that program is something that we could have bought off the open market anyway. So it was really more of a cost-saving measure for our taxpayers as opposed to getting something that we couldn't get otherwise.
Well, that makes sense. So at the top of the show, we talked about how you rose to the force and kind of what you've seen change over the years. But what do you see the future of policing look like? Like, I know you just mentioned, the social worker aspect where, in order to maybe avoid some of these with domestic situations and stuff like that, where it might not need someone being arrested, but it might need social worker, like that might be a better option. Do you see more of that kind of happening in the future, like a larger kind of social worker like division? Any other, changes you see coming in policing in the next decade?
Well, I would like to see more social workers, but I don't think that they necessarily need to be members of a local police department.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's partnerships with whether it's another city or state agency or an agency that's in the private sector, to have the availability. I think a lot of things got thrusted on police officers over the last 10 or 15 years because no one else was available to do it. And in some ways it's worked out, and in other ways it has not worked out. And the funding has to be there for those support services. You can't take away from what the police are doing, but you can enhance that through those partnerships. And I think that's the missing piece right now is, if we have to be available at 2:00 in the morning or 3:00 in the morning, well, then so does that social worker.
So that social worker that's designated,
So we respond to that scene and we make that scene safe, to say, okay, there's no weapons involved, no one's injured, go in and do your thing. And we'll wait outside, or if you feel you don't need us at all, just give us the signal and we'll go back in service and be available for another call. So I think it can work. I think that there's a lot of things that the police have been asked to do that we do it because we are the jacks of all trades sometimes. Just like when it comes to natural disasters or anything else, that when the police show up, it's what do you need us to do? And I think this is what has happened over the last several years, and we need to swing the pendulum back a little bit and get more services that people can use, and people who are probably better qualified for long-term solutions to the problems, so that we can go back to just the short term. Right, exactly.
And I think that's one thing to remember, not only with this hopefully better results for the people, but also for the officers who didn't grow up wanting to be social workers. Like they want to be police officers, and let the social workers do the social work and let police officers do the policing. I think that's, it's good for the officers as well to not have necessarily that responsibility that they might not want or may not have the proper training for as a social worker would.
Well, I think that's it. It's really more the proper training and or education that they don't have to do the long-term solutions to problems. I mean, sure, we have some officers that are trained in crisis intervention, things of that nature. But again, these are 3, 4, maybe 5-day classes, that you don't learn as I always say, you don't learn the DSM-5, or I think now it's probably the DSM-6 or 7 in a week. There's people who have learned, gone to school for years to learn these things and to learn the psychology of people. And
If we get
we
those
could, if
people to help us out, that would be
right,
great.
exactly. We do. We need those people to help us out. So, we have to find the money somewhere for some things to make sure that we're taking a holistic approach to these types of calls, and that the police can do, the other things that we are better equipped for. Reach, community outreach. More presence, both
Hmm.
direct and omnipresence, and solving, preventing crime and solving crime when we're unable to prevent it.
Yeah. And kind of one last question. You mentioned community outreach. Have there been any programs that you've had that you're particularly proud of that you've seen good success with?
COVID has really put a damper on a lot of things that
Yeah.
we normally do. A lot of the community events that were held annually that we were a big part of
Hmm.
stopped during 2020, and so far most of 2021 as well. There are a few things that are coming up this month and next that we're hoping will still be able to go on, but clearly we're watching the the numbers.
Adaptability and being
Right.
able to pivot quick has been the name of the game for a little while here.
But I'm most proud of our cadet program. We have one of, if not the largest cadet program in the state of Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
At its peak, we have about 170 teenagers as part of that program. A very diverse program where they learn about law enforcement, and they really help us out with a lot of these events, whether it's low-level traffic control, low-level security. Just an opportunity for them to work side by side with many of our officers.
Yeah.
Our Citizens Police Academy, we do that as well. And what I like about our academy and what we try to do in many instances is to attract people who have some concerns about police. It's nice to have a room full of people who are cheerleaders, but I don't know if that helps us move the needle.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have some people who have some concerns, so they get an opportunity to see what we do, why we do it, but for them to be able to offer some suggestions on how we can do it better, or offer some criticism when necessary in a more controlled environment, because we certainly welcome constructive feedback on how we can improve those relations with the community. And then, like I said, other events. We partner with a group called the Danbury Works Initiative. It's the United Way, our education department, some other city departments, fire department. We all collaborate, and our goal is really to reduce poverty and increase access to information and services throughout our entire Danbury community. Annually, we were having here what we call a party on the patio at police headquarters. We didn't have it last year. Normally it's in August. We probably are going to push it back to September or October this year. But it gives people in the community an opportunity to come to the police station for a positive event. They're not coming to bail someone out, or they're not coming to make a complaint, of being victimized by a crime, but just for a positive event. We have a DJ. We usually give out some sort of items to the community, whether it's back to school items or just information on services that are available throughout the Danbury community. The first year we had it, we had maybe 150 people show up. Chick-fil-A gave us, donated food for us to give away to people. And so the second year we figured, okay, it's probably going to be about another 150, 200 people. We had over 500 show up.
Word spread about the free food.
Yeah. So, so anytime we have an opportunity to show that police officers are just members of the community, I think it's important. A couple of our local churches have big block parties every year, and we try to have a presence at those. There's a local community that has a block party coming up this year. We have a presence at those, and at one of them we actually donate hot dogs and hamburgers.
Excellent.
and we have a couple of members of our department who are actually there cooking all day for the community. So we try to do as much outreach as we possibly can.
Yeah.
Over during the COVID period and over the last several months, we've also engaged our partners from our local communities, our chiefs from 7 of our surrounding towns. We all got together for a community Zoom meeting, sponsored by one of our local organizations, to talk about equity and diversity and any other issues in law enforcement that was on the minds of people in our community.
Yeah.
And that went over extremely well. And we made a pledge to keep each other informed of events going on in each of our communities. So even if it means, a Bethel or Brookfield or a Ridgefield officer coming over to some of our community events, even if they only stay an hour, just, for that visual, for people to say, wow, Brookfield does care about what's happening in Danbury or Bethel, and vice versa. If Danbury officer goes over to some of their events and can only stay an hour, it just gives that feeling that we're in this together and that we do care about our entire community, not just within our borders.
Which is important, especially in a state as small as Connecticut.
Exactly.
These other towns aren't all that far away, and chases go across borders and stuff all the time. At least I know in New Haven, Hamden, there's always stuff with the back and forth on that. Well, Chief Patrick Ridenhour, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope the show airs well.
Me too. Take care.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank our guest, Chief Patrick Ridenhour. We'd like to thank our premier sponsors, Digital Back Office, Palo Alto Networks, who you can check out at digitalbackoffice.com and paloaltonetworks.com. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry draws on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.